My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. Last week, at a family meeting, my parents demanded I hand over 1/3 of my salary to my sister. They called it the Family Support Fund. They presented me with a spreadsheet detailing why my sister deserved the fruits of my labor more than I did. But what they didn't know was that I had files of my own, locked away safely in my lawyer's office, and those files were about to wipe the smug smiles right off their faces. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from in the comments below. And before we dive into the worst family meeting of all time, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about just how far family boundaries can be pushed. To understand why I was sitting there, staring at an Excel spreadsheet that dissected my life, you need to understand the ecosystem of my family. It wasn't so much a family as it was a solar system that revolved around a single sun. My little sister, Chloe. Chloe, 4 years my junior, was a whirlwind of paint splatters, unfinished poems, and dreams that were always bigger than her bank account. My parents, Robert and Susan, never saw her as irresponsible. They saw her as a sensitive soul. They called her chronic financial instability the price of creativity. Her laziness was waiting for the muse. Her lack of direction was exploring her path. And me? I was the pragmatist, the stabilizer, the boring, dependable planet in orbit whose gravitational pull kept their system from flying apart. I was the one who put myself through college on student loans and 3 part-time jobs brewing coffee at 6 a.m., babysitting in the evenings, and tutoring math on weekends. I got my master's degree in data science while my peers were backpacking through Europe. I never asked for help, mostly because I learned very early on that help wasn't meant for me. I remember when I was 12, I saved my allowance for 6 solid months to buy a used mountain bike. I did odd jobs for the neighbors, mowing lawns and walking dogs. The day I brought it home, gleaming and new to me, Chloe threw a tantrum. She, at 8 years old, cried and screamed that it wasn't fair. The next week, my parents bought her a brand new bike. "She's just too sensitive to understand having to wait, sweetie," my mother had explained to me. That was my first lesson in our family's economy. My hard work bought used goods. Chloe's tears bought brand new. The moment I landed my first real job at a tech firm, I officially graduated from responsible child to family safety net. And they fell into it, again and again, with increasing weight. It started small, like tiny cracks in a dam. "Clara, honey, Chloe just needs $500 for an art workshop. It could be career-changing." I, in my post-grad naivety, eager to help, paid for it. The workshop turned out to be a week-long music festival, and the only career change was a temporary tattoo. But I said nothing. 6 months later, it was Chloe's first business venture, an online shop for handmade jewelry. "She just needs $2,000 for startup costs, sweetie." This could be her big break. I transferred the money. The shop lasted 4 months before Chloe decided shipping was too spiritually confining. The money vanished, without a thank you, without acknowledgement. The real wound, the injustice that festered, came about 3 years ago. It was the Bali incident. Chloe decided she needed to find herself in Bali for 3 months. My parents convened a dinner, not to ask my opinion, but to inform me of the financial plan. "We'll cover her flight," my father said, as if bestowing a great favor. "And we thought you could cover her living expenses while she's there. You know, you're the one with the stable income." I was stunned. The air was sucked out of my lungs. "Dad, that's thousands of dollars. I'm trying to save for a down payment on a house." My mother placed her hand on mine, her eyes filled with a calculated disappointment, a weapon she had honed over years. "Clara, don't be so selfish. Your sister is at a crossroads. Her spirit needs this nourishment. You have a career, an apartment. This is what family does for each other. We lift each other up." The manipulation was perfect. They had framed my financial prudence as selfishness and Chloe's irresponsibility as a noble spiritual journey. They painted a picture where I was the miserly gatekeeper holding my sister back from enlightenment. I caved. The guilt won. I drained my savings, pushing my own dream of a home back by another year. Chloe got her trip. She came back with a tan, a few trinkets, and no more direction than when she left. I got a postcard that said, "The weather's great." That was all the acknowledgement I received for my sacrifice, for putting my dream in storage. That was the pattern. Chloe's needs were an emotional and artistic emergency. My needs were an administrative inconvenience. Chloe's successes, however imaginary, were celebrated with dinners and praise. My successes, however real and hard-won, were seen as a communal resource, a family treasury to which they had full access. I wasn't their daughter in the same way. I was their backup plan. I was their investment fund for Chloe's dreams. I had thought that my hard work and generosity would eventually make them see me, respect me as an individual. I had no idea it was only making them believe they had a right to what was mine, that the fruits of my labor were, in fact, their property. I thought my recent big promotion would finally change things. I hoped it would make them proud. Instead, it became the bait, and I had no idea they were preparing to spring a trap more brazen than anything I had ever imagined. The catalyst was an email. A simple email with the subject line, "Promotion. Head of Data Analytics." It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, after a grueling presentation I had been preparing for weeks. I had developed a new algorithm that could predict market volatility with unprecedented accuracy, a project that had saved the company millions in its trial phase. When the CEO's email popped into my inbox, I held my breath. After 4 years of grinding, of sacrificed weekends and lunches eaten at my desk, I had finally made it. The position came not just with an impressive title and a corner office, but with a salary that catapulted me into an income bracket I had only ever dreamed of. My new salary was $250,000 a year. My first reaction was a shaky, trembling relief, a wave of emotions so potent I had to grip the edge of my desk. I'd made it. Finally. The student loans, an anchor I'd been dragging for a decade, could be paid off in a year. A house was no longer a distant dream. For the first time in my adult life, I felt secure. Not just paycheck to paycheck secure, but foundational, deep-seated security. Then, another feeling crept in, cold and familiar. Dread. What was I going to tell my family? Part of me, the little girl who still craved their approval, wanted to call them immediately and shout it from the rooftops. "Look, I did it. I succeeded in spite of everything. Are you proud of me?" But the other part, the adult who had been conditioned by years of disappointment, whispered a warning. "They won't see this as your success. They will see this as an upgrade to their funding." I waited 3 days, warring with myself in a draining internal battle. I drafted and deleted a dozen text messages. Finally, I decided to tell them at our weekly Sunday dinner. It was their stage, familiar territory. I rehearsed a little speech, focusing on the hard work and dedication. I would be modest about the money. When I announced the news, their initial reaction seemed genuinely positive. "Oh, Clara, that's wonderful," my mother exclaimed, giving me a hug that lasted just a little too long. My father clapped me on the back. A rare gesture. "Knew you had it in you." Always a hard worker. Chloe, however, was silent. She poked at the chicken on her plate, a strained smile plastered on her face. "Wow," she finally said, her voice dripping with saccharine sarcasm. "Must be nice not to have to worry about money. Some of us have to worry about creating art, not algorithms." The jab, as usual, was ignored by my parents, but it was their eyes that truly worried me. After the initial shock, after the veneer of pride, I saw something else flicker in their gazes. It wasn't pride, it was calculation. I could see the numbers spinning in their heads, the gears turning, pricing my achievement in terms of what it could do for them. My father began asking probing questions. "So what exactly is the increase? Does that come with stock options? How's the 401 kelvins match?" I answered vaguely, feeling more like I was being audited than congratulated. The dinner ended on a strange note. They were too happy, too artificially enthusiastic. As I was driving home that night, my phone pinged with a text from my mother. "We are so incredibly proud of you. We need to talk soon about future planning for the family. Love you." Future planning. The phrase made my stomach clench. It was their code. It was their euphemism for how can Clara's success benefit Chloe. Over the next few days, the hints began like a light drizzle before a hurricane. My mother would send me links to expensive studio apartments downtown with the caption, "Look, a perfect place for Chloe to find inspiration." My father would casually mention how Chloe's car was making funny noises and how a new, reliable car would be so good for her safety. Chloe would post sad-toned social media updates about how expensive quality art supplies were, knowing I would see them. Every text, every call, was a little probe, testing my defenses, checking how much I was willing to give. The excitement over my accomplishment had quickly curdled into a growing sense of dread. They were building up to something big. They were building a case, laying the foundation for their next and biggest demand. I knew a confrontation was coming. I just didn't realize how formal, how cold-blooded, and how utterly life-altering it would be. Over the next month, the pressure campaign shifted from subtle hints to a full-blown offensive. It felt like a coordinated strategy, a three-pronged attack on my bank account and my sanity, designed to wear me down into submission. The first incident was the gallery crisis. Chloe called me on a Tuesday afternoon in a manufactured panic. A small local art gallery had, against all odds, agreed to display 3 of her pieces in a group show. It was her biggest opportunity yet, a chance to finally be discovered. The problem? She needed $1,500 immediately for professional framing, insured transport, and a non-refundable participation fee. "You have to help me, Clara," she wailed into the phone, her voice trembling with practiced urgency. "This is everything to me. I'll pay you back as soon as I sell a piece, I promise." The promise hung in the air, hollow and weightless like all the promises before it. But the image of my sister, for once, having a genuine shot, softened me. That small, naive part of me still wanted to believe in her. I hesitated. "Chloe, that's a lot of money. I need to think about it." "Think about it." Her voice turned sharp. "Well, you're thinking, my chance is going to disappear." She hung up on me. 20 minutes later, my father called. His tone wasn't that of a father, but of a disappointed account manager. "Your mother tells me you're hesitating to help your sister. I can't believe it. Clara, after everything we've done for you, you'd begrudge her a life-changing opportunity? Do you have any idea how that looks? Our wealthy daughter refusing to help her struggling artist sister?" They were tag-teaming me, a well-rehearsed tactic. The emotional one attacks first, then the logical, rational one follows up. I felt cornered, besieged. Once again, I relented. I sent the money, feeling a wave of resentment and self-loathing wash over me. The second incident was even more brazen. I came home from a 12-hour workday to find their cars in my driveway. They were waiting for me in my living room, an uninvited council. They wore grave expressions. "We need to talk," my mother said, her tone allowing no argument. It turned out Chloe's toxic roommate, the one I knew had been fed up with paying the lion's share of the bills, had abruptly moved out, leaving Chloe on the hook for the full rent on an apartment she couldn't possibly afford. Their solution? "It would be so much easier if you just covered the roommate's half for a few months," my father suggested casually, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Just until Chloe finds someone new. It's only logical. You wouldn't even notice the money was gone." "Dad, that's not logical at all," I protested, my exhaustion turning to defiance. "That's not my responsibility. Chloe needs to find a cheaper place or a roommate immediately." "You don't get it," Chloe interjected, the tears already welling up, a calculated performance. "The rental market is a nightmare. I can't be creative if I'm stressed about being evicted. The anxiety is killing my art." The conversation devolved into an argument. They accused me of being heartless, selfish, obsessed with money. They said success had changed me, made me cold and distant from the people who really matter. They pulled out every manipulative trick in the book. Guilt, shame, comparison. My sister would do anything for me, my mother said, her eyes glistening. That's what family means. Exhausted and emotionally battered, assaulted in my own home, I agreed to cover 1 month's rent, just to end the onslaught. It was a mistake. It only showed them that enough pressure, enough aggression, would make me break. My final attempt at a peaceful resolution failed spectacularly. The following week, I invited my mother to lunch, hoping that on neutral ground, one-on-one, I could make her understand. Mom, I began gently after we had ordered. I love everyone, but I feel like I'm being taken advantage of financially. I'm working so hard to build a future for myself, and I feel like it's being chipped away. I need to set some boundaries. My mother put down her fork. Her warm expression vanished, replaced by an icy mask. Boundaries? She repeated the word as if it were a profanity. There are no boundaries in a family, Clara. Family is about sacrifice. Family is a single unit. Are you saying you're not going to help us anymore, after we sacrificed so much to raise you? Of course not, I tried to explain. I'm just saying I can't be the solution to all of Chloe's financial problems. She needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. Oh, I see, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Now that you're making big money, you think you're better than us. You think your sister is a burden. I wonder what you tell your rich colleagues about your poor family, the ones who are always holding you back. She had twisted my attempt at a healthy conversation into an attack on my character, on my loyalty. I paid for lunch and left, feeling worse than before, as if I'd just been accused of treason. The wake-up call came from an unexpected source. David, my mentor at work, a kind, older man who had taken me under his wing, had noticed my increasing stress. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, the way I'd stare at my screen without really seeing it. He invited me for coffee one afternoon. "Is everything okay, Clara?" he asked. "You haven't seemed like yourself lately." To a safe outsider, someone with no stake in the situation, I let it all out. The demands, the guilt, the relentless pressure. He listened patiently, without judgment, nodding occasionally. When I finished, choking back tears of frustration, he looked me straight in the eye and said the thing I needed to hear but was too afraid to admit. "Clara," he said, gently but firmly, "they don't see you as family. They see you as a resource. Their daughter is Chloe. You are their financial plan. The more you give, the more they will take. This will not stop until you make it stop. You are not the one at fault. You are simply the one being used." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they were also like a breath of fresh air. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. My feelings were valid. The situation was as bad as I thought it was. David gave me the validation my own family denied me. I went back to my office that day with a new resolve. I would not let them destroy the future I had worked so hard to build. It was that resolve that gave me the strength for what came next. Because just 2 days later, I received the text message summoning me to the official family meeting. I didn't know then that it wasn't a meeting, it was an ambush. The ambush was disguised as a Friday night dinner invitation. "Just the 4 of us," my mother had said over the phone, her voice cloyingly sweet, like honey coating a poison pill. "We need to talk as a family and clear the air." The disingenuousness of it put me on high alert. Her lasagna was the weapon of choice when she wanted something. I almost declined, but David's words echoed in my head. "This won't stop until you make it stop." I knew I had to see this through to the end. I arrived at their house, my stomach in knots. The house I grew up in suddenly felt foreign and hostile. The air was thick with tension. There was no music, no laughter, just the heavy silence of expectation. They were seated in the living room, not on the comfortable sofas, but on hard-backed dining chairs arranged in a row opposite a single, isolated chair. The chair for me. It felt like an interrogation, a tribunal. "Sit down, Clara," my father said, his voice stripped of fatherly warmth and full of businesslike gravity. As I sat, feeling like a defendant, he placed a laptop on the coffee table and swiveled it to face me. On the screen was an Excel spreadsheet. Its title, in bold and underlined, read, Income Allocation and Family Contribution. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a discussion. This was a presentation. For the next 15 minutes, my father delivered a cold, emotionless pitch, as if he were briefing a board of directors. He had listed all of my estimated monthly expenses generously. I might add rent, bills, food, retirement savings, even a line item for entertainment. Then, he listed all of Chloe's needs. The list was ludicrous. It included not just her rent and utilities, but premium art supplies, inspirational travel fund, a wellness and self-care stipend, and even a monthly allowance for personal development. The spreadsheet concluded that, after all my expenses, I had a significant disposable income surplus each month. As you can see, my father said, pointing to a highlighted yellow cell at the bottom of the page with a neatly rounded number. The solution is quite simple. We propose that you transfer 33% of your monthly take-home pay into a joint account. We'll call it the Chloe Fund. Your mother and I will manage it to ensure her needs are met and she can pursue her art without financial stress. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a request for help. This was a demand, a family-imposed tax. They had quantified my existence, analyzed my life, and decided that a third of it belonged to my sister. They presented it not as a request, but as a logical, unavoidable conclusion. Are you kidding me? I stammered, searching their faces for some sign that this was a sick joke, a horrible misunderstanding. We are perfectly serious, Clara, my mother said, her expression as hard as granite, devoid of sympathy. This is the fairest way. You have more than enough, and your sister doesn't have enough. Family is about sharing the burden. This isn't sharing a burden. My voice began to tremble with rage. This is fully funding an adult's lifestyle. Chloe can get a job. Chloe, who had been silent until then, letting her parents fight her battle, burst into theatrical tears. I can't just get a job like you. I'm an artist. The stress of a 9-to-5 would kill my creativity. I thought you, of all people, would understand that. That was it. The final straw. It wasn't the spreadsheet. It wasn't the outrageous demand. It was the absolute, unshakable entitlement. Their profound belief that I owed them my life, that my sacrifices were my duty, that their dreams were more important than mine. They weren't just asking for my money. They were laying claim to my life. In that moment, everything crystallized. David was right. I wasn't their daughter. I was an investment, and this was them cashing out. All the love I thought I was getting was just asset management. A cold calm washed over me. The rage turned to crystal clear clarity. I stood up. No, I said, my voice steady and clear, the tremor gone. What? My father sputtered, as if the word no was not in his vocabulary. The answer is no. There will be no Chloe Fund. There will be no 33%. There will not be one more cent ever. You can't do that, my mother shrieked, getting to her feet, her face flushed with fury. We're your family. You owe us. No, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I owe you nothing. You've made it perfectly clear I'm not family. I'm a business plan. And this business plan has just been liquidated. I turned and walked to the door, leaving their shouts of disbelief and anger behind me. As I sat in my car, the doors locked, the calm shattered, and I began to sob. But they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of liberation, of anger finally released. They had pushed me too far. They had underestimated me completely. They thought they had me cornered. They had no idea I had been preparing for this moment for years. They knew nothing about the files I kept, and they certainly didn't know about my lawyer. My secret weapon wasn't forged in the anger of that night. It had been built slowly, methodically, over 5 years, starting with a life-changing lunch. It began after the Bali incident, when I was sitting across from my best friend from college, Mark, who was now a contract lawyer. I had been telling him about my financial sacrifice, expecting sympathy. Instead, I got a dose of cold, hard reality. "Clara," he said, setting down his coffee cup, "you're setting a dangerous precedent. They're never going to stop. You need to protect yourself." "But how?" I had asked, feeling helpless. "They're my family. Treat it like a business transaction, because that's how they're treating it," he advised. "The next time they ask for a large sum, call it a loan. Draft a simple promissory note. It doesn't have to be complex. Just state the amount, the date, and get their signature. Tell them it's for your tax records, or to keep track of things. Think of it as an experiment. If they truly intend to pay it back, they won't hesitate to sign. If they balk, then you'll know their real intentions." That advice stuck with me. The next time Chloe needed to borrow $3,000 to fix the car she'd crashed into a light pole, I was ready. I downloaded a simple promissory note template. When she arrived, with her crocodile tears and a tragic story, I listened patiently. Then I said, "Sure, Chloe, I can help. I just need you to sign this for me so I can keep track of it for my accounting." I held my breath, expecting an argument. Instead, Chloe, interested only in getting the money, glanced at the paper and signed it without a second thought. "Okay, whatever," she said, her hand already out for the check. It had worked. I used the same strategy with my parents. When they borrowed $5,000 to fix their roof after spending their savings on a luxury cruise, I presented a similar agreement. "Oh, Clara, you're always so organized," my mother had laughed, signing her name with a flourish. They saw it as a quirk of mine, a byproduct of my analytical brain. They never saw it as a binding legal instrument. They never read the fine print. Over 5 years, I accumulated a portfolio. 14 separate loan agreements, each one signed and dated. From Chloe's apartment deposits, to paying off my mother's credit card bills, to funding my father's latest art research trip. Each time, they signed. Each signature was another brick in the defensive wall I was building around my future. Now, I had it all. The originals were stored safely in a bank deposit box. Digital copies were encrypted on a hard drive. Each agreement was cross-referenced with a bank statement showing the transfer of funds. The grand total, not including any interest, came to $47,850, a sum I knew they could never repay. The Saturday morning after the family meeting, instead of stewing in my anger, I took action. I called Miss Albright, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney I had retained for consulting a few years prior. She specialized in contracts and financial disputes. I sat in her bright, modern office and laid everything out. The long history of financial dependency, the disastrous family meeting with the Chloe Fund demand, and finally, my secret weapon, the folder. Miss Albright reviewed the loan agreements, her eyebrow arching slightly with each signature. She read a few of the terms aloud with amusement. "How ironic," she remarked. "They were signing legal documents while treating you as if you had no legal rights at all." "They thought it was a joke," I said. "Well," Miss Albright said, leaning back in her chair, "these signatures make it anything but a joke. These are legally binding contracts, Clara. You have every right to pursue repayment for this entire amount, plus interest where stipulated." "I don't want the money," I said honestly. "I want freedom. I want this to stop. Permanently." "I understand," she said. "Then, we won't use these as a sword. We'll use them as a shield. A very, very large and impenetrable shield." Our plan was simple but effective. I would email my parents and agree to a follow-up meeting to discuss the legal details of their proposal. The meeting, however, would not be at their house. It would be here, in Miss Albright's conference room. I would not tell them my lawyer would be present. "They will arrive, thinking they are in complete control," Miss Albright explained. "They will think you've come to surrender. Instead, we will present them with a completely different reality. No yelling, No accusations. Just cold, hard facts and documents bearing their own signatures. We will use their own logic and law against them. I left Miss Albright's office feeling a power I had never felt before. The fear and guilt had evaporated, replaced by a cold resolve. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the one who was about to rewrite the ending. That night, I composed the email. Dear Mom, Dad, and Chloe, after careful consideration, I agree that we should discuss this proposal further. However, since it involves significant financial and legal matters, I think it's best we meet on neutral ground. I have booked a meeting room for Wednesday at 2 p.m. Here is the address. See you then. Love, Clara. They replied within the hour. Wonderful, sweetie. So glad you've seen reason. See you Wednesday. They had no idea that the reason I'd seen was not theirs. It was fortified with legal paperwork and backed by a lawyer who was ready for a fight. They were walking into my territory, on my terms. They thought they were coming for a collection. They had no idea they were about to face an audit of their years of entitlement. On Wednesday at 1:55 p.m., I sat with Miss Albright in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the harbor. The room was cold and impersonal, a stark contrast to my parents' cloying, emotionally charged living room. Here, feelings were irrelevant. Only facts mattered. On the polished mahogany table in front of us, a single, slim file lay closed. Inside was the summary of their debts and a copy of every single loan agreement they had ever signed. At 2 p.m. on the dot, they arrived. My father entered first, exuding the swagger of a man about to close a deal. He was wearing a suit, as if this were a business negotiation. My mother and Chloe followed, both smiling, the victors arriving to claim their prize. Their smiles died the moment they saw Miss Albright sitting beside me, calm and professional. Clara, who is this? My father demanded, his voice edged with irritation, his confidence immediately shaken. This is my attorney, Miss Albright, I said calmly. Since our discussion involves a long-term financial contract, I thought it was prudent to have legal counsel present. Please, have a seat. They exchanged worried glances, but sat down on the other side of the massive table. Their swagger was gone. They had expected a contrite daughter, not a prepared adversary. All right, my father began, trying to regain control, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. As we were discussing, we're here to finalize the terms of the Family Support Fund. Miss Albright offered a polite, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Before we get to that, Mr. Preston, she said, her voice crisp and dispassionate, Clara and I have been reviewing the financial history between herself and the family. We've prepared a document to help facilitate our discussion. I believe you will all find it very illuminating. She pushed the file across the table. The movement was smooth and deliberate. The file slid across the polished wood and came to a stop directly in front of my father. He looked at it as if it were a snake. He picked it up hesitantly. As he opened it, I watched the color drain from his face. My mother and Chloe leaned in to see. A thick silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft rustle of paper as my father flipped through the pages. The first page was the summary, a numbered list of 14 transactions, complete with dates, amounts, and a final line in bold type. Total outstanding debt, $47,850. What is this? My mother stammered, her face ashen. That, I said, my voice even and devoid of emotion, is an accounting of every dollar I have provided to you over the last 5 years that has not been repaid. Those were gifts, Chloe exclaimed, her voice high and incredulous. You always said you were helping. I said I was lending, I corrected, emphasizing the word, and you all agreed to it, in writing. My father had reached the subsequent pages. There, in black and white, were the copies of each promissory note, and at the bottom of each one, unmistakable, were their signatures. My father's forceful scrawl, my mother's flowery script, Chloe's careless loop. I don't understand, my father said, but the conviction had gone out of his voice. He was fumbling. These were just formalities Clara did to keep track of things. They don't mean anything. Oh, they mean a great deal, sir, Miss Albright interjected, her voice cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. Your signature on a document outlining the terms of a loan is the very definition of a legally binding contract. Every single one of these is enforceable in a court of law. With the bank statements, Miss Clara has to prove the transfer of funds. The case is airtight. The reality of the situation began to dawn on them, cold and inescapable. A stunned silence descended. The smug entitlement was gone, replaced by disbelief and a creeping fear. My mother was the first to break. "Clara, how could you do this to us?" she cried, real tears this time. "Sue your own family. Take us to court." I never said anything about suing, I stated calmly. I am simply presenting the facts. You came here today to demand a third of my future income. But the record shows you already owe me a significant amount from the past. I looked at each of them in turn, no longer the daughter seeking approval, but the creditor reviewing her options. How can you, in good conscience, ask for one more penny from me when you haven't even begun to pay back what you already owe? No one had an answer. My father, a man who always had an answer for everything, just sat there, staring at his own signature as if he'd never seen it before. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. So what now?" Chloe whispered. "Are you going to make us pay it all back? We don't have it." This was the moment all the power shifted to my side of the table. I held all the cards. "No," I said. "I'm not going to ask for it back. I'm going to do something better. I'm going to forgive the debt. $47,850. It's all gone." A flicker of hope ignited in their eyes. My mother started to say, "Oh, Clara." I knew. I held up a hand to stop her. On one condition. This is not a gift. This is a settlement. This debt forgiveness is the final payment. The final help. The final contribution. From this moment forward, our financial relationship is over. There will be no Chloe fund. There will be no emergency requests. There will be no late-night pleas. The Bank of Clara is permanently closed. I stood up, feeling 10 feet tall. You don't have to worry about managing my income anymore, because it is no longer any of your business. This meeting is over. Miss Albright stood as well. I will be drafting a formal settlement agreement in which Miss Clara agrees to forgive these debts in exchange for your agreement to make no future financial claims. I will send it to you for your signatures. I strongly advise you to sign it." They just sat there, stunned into immobility, as if they were frozen in place. They had walked into that room as claimants. They were now pardoned debtors. The terms of their freedom read aloud to them. As I walked out of that conference room, leaving them in their stunned silence, I felt an extraordinary sense of release. I had won my life back. I just didn't know yet what the cost of that freedom would truly be. I didn't wait for them. I walked straight from Miss Albright's office to my car and drove, not looking back. I turned off my phone. It was a small act, but it felt revolutionary. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for a guilt-tripping text or a fake emergency call. The silence was magnificent. I drove to the coast, an old habit I'd let go of. I parked the car and walked along the beach, letting the cold, biting waves wash over my feet, feeling as though they were washing away the last residues of the confrontation. The salty, crisp air seemed to scrub away years of resentment and obligation. As the sun began to set, painting the water in shades of orange and purple, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. A deep, undisturbed peace. The aftermath from their side came swiftly. That evening, when I finally turned my phone back on in the safety of my apartment, it nearly exploded. 27 missed calls. Over 50 text messages. They were a case study in the stages of grief and manipulation. The first texts were furious, accusatory. "How dare you humiliate us like that? You've destroyed this family." The next batch shifted to pleading. Clara, please, we can talk about this. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't know you felt that way. The final ones, sent late into the night, were desperate. We're sorry. Please just call us back. We need you. I read them, not with guilt, but with a clinical detachment. I saw the patterns clearly. I didn't respond. For the next few weeks, I carved out a space for myself. I blocked their numbers for 2 weeks to give myself time to heal without interruption. I used the money that would have been funneled into the Chloe Fund and booked a trip I'd always wanted to take, a week of solo hiking in the Rocky Mountains. As I stood on a mountaintop, the air thin and pure, looking out over an endless valley, I felt the smallness of my problems and the vastness of my possibilities. My family wasn't my whole world. They were just a small part of it, a part I could now choose how to interact with. Meanwhile, their new reality was taking shape. Without my safety net, Chloe was forced to face the consequences. She couldn't make rent and eventually had to move back in with my parents, a humiliation she had never had to face. Her childhood bedroom was no longer an artist's retreat. It was a symbol of failure. She had to sell the new car I had helped her buy to cover her costs. For the first time in her life, Chloe had to get a real job as a barista at a local coffee shop. The culture shock was immense. My parents, too, were confronted with an uncomfortable truth. They realized how much of their lifestyle had been subsidized by my generosity. They had to cut back. No more spontaneous dinners at expensive restaurants, no more lavish weekend getaways. They were forced to live within their own means, and they didn't like it. My absence had created a vacuum, not just financially, but emotionally. They no longer had Project Chloe to focus on, and they were forced to confront their own marriage. I started rebuilding my life around people who genuinely cared for me. I spent more time with friends. I reconnected with David, my mentor, and thanked him for giving me the clarity I needed. "I always knew you had it in you," he said with a smile. I focused on my work with a renewed energy, no longer weighed down by the burden of resentment. When I finally unblocked their numbers, the messages had changed. The anger was gone, replaced by a sad, resigned tone. My mother sent a simple text, "We miss you." I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Our relationship was broken, perhaps irreparably. But as I sat in my apartment, planning my own future with my own money, I knew I had made the only choice I could. I had chosen myself. Freedom had a cost, and that cost was the comfort of a family I'd come to realize had never really existed in the first place. I thought that distance would be permanent. But 10 months later, a letter arrived that changed the trajectory of everything once again, in a way I never could have predicted. 6 months can change a lot. They serve as a long enough crucible for old, toxic habits to die off, and for new, fragile ones to have a chance to take root. In those 10 months, I lived for myself, fully and unapologetically, for the first time in my adult life. I paid off my student loans in one massive single payment, a ceremonial act so profound that I had to pull my car over after hitting submit on my banking app and just sob with relief for 10 straight minutes. The weight I had carried for a decade, a tangible reminder of my years of struggle, was gone. It felt like I had shed a lead coat I didn't even realize I was wearing. A few months later, I took my savings, an amount that was growing at an astonishing rate now that I was no longer funding the lives of 3 other adults, and my excellent credit, and bought a beautiful condo downtown. It was on the 23rd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city, which glittered like a man-made galaxy at night. It was my space, bought with my money, decorated to my taste, minimalist, clean, and peaceful. There were no melancholic paintings by Chloe on the walls, or my parents' bulky, sentimental furniture taking up space. Every single item was chosen by me, for me. It was a sanctuary, a fortress of solitude that no manipulation could breach. My career flourished, too. Freed from the constant distraction of panicked phone calls and surprise financial drains, I was able to dedicate my full mental energy to my work. I was promoted again, put in charge of a major artificial intelligence project that would shape the company's future. I was leading a team, mentoring younger analysts, and finding a new passion in leadership. I started dating a kind, funny architect named Alex, who was impressed by my mind, not my balance sheet. On our third date, I told him the condensed version of my family story, half expecting him to run. Instead, he listened intently, and then said, "It sounds like you had to be the only adult in the room for a long time. You must have been exhausted. To be seen so clearly, not to be judged, was profound. My life was full, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine, built on my own terms." My relationship with my family remained distant, an archipelago of separate islands rather than a unified continent. After the initial silence, after the settlement agreement was signed and returned, we established a new protocol, like diplomats from warring nations searching for a tentative peace. Short, polite phone calls every 2 weeks. No requests, no guilt trips, just simple, factual updates. Through these calls, I pieced together their new lives shaped by my absence. Chloe was still working at the coffee shop. The daily grind, she called it with a wry irony. She hated it. She complained about the rude customers and the early shifts. But there was something else in her voice, a weary resignation I'd never heard before. For the first time, her problems were real. She was paying her bills. She was learning about budgeting. She had to learn the difference between a want and a need. She was growing up, painfully and slowly, like a plant forced to grow through concrete. My parents sold my childhood home, the one filled with memories of favoritism and unspoken obligations. They downsized to a smaller, more manageable house in the suburbs. My mother had to go back to work part-time as a receptionist, something she hadn't done in 20 years. They were learning to live within their own means. "It's been an adjustment," my mother admitted on one call, her voice tinged with a bitterness she tried to hide. "Justice isn't always a lightning bolt from the sky. Sometimes, it's just reality reasserting itself." Then the letter arrived. It wasn't sent to my email, but to my new physical address, which meant they had to ask for it. A small act of humility. It was handwritten on a single piece of plain paper, not the artsy, expensive stationery Chloe used to favor. It was from Chloe. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, my heart pounding, bracing myself for another disguised request. A new tactic. But it wasn't a request. It was a confession. "Dear Clara," it began, her handwriting less of a flourish and more deliberate than I remembered. "I don't know where to start. I just want to say I'm sorry. Not just for the meeting, but for everything. My whole life. I've been jealous of you. Everything seemed so easy for you, while I always struggled. I didn't realize it was because you were working, and I wasn't. I thought work was for untalented people, that I was somehow above it, that my creativity granted me a free pass. I was wrong. Having this job, dealing with people who yell at me because I got their latte order wrong, standing on my feet for 8 hours, worrying about making rent on time, it's taught me more than all my years of pursuing art. It's taught me about respect, and I realize I never gave you any. I took your hard work for granted and called it luck. I took your generosity as an obligation. You don't owe me anything. I hope one day you can forgive me. Love, Chloe." Tucked inside was a check for $20. The memo line read, "First installment." It was ludicrous. At this rate, she'd pay me back in about 200 years. With tears in my eyes, I laughed. It was the most sincere, humble, and responsible thing she had ever done. I didn't send the check back. I didn't cash it either. I put it in a drawer in my desk. A reminder that change, even if it's slow and imperfect, is possible. The next week, I did something I thought I'd never do again. I invited them to my new condo for dinner. It wasn't an obligation. It was a choice. It was an experiment to see if something new could grow from the ashes of our old relationship. They arrived on time, a first. They entered hesitantly, looking around in awe. My father was unusually quiet. My mother kept gushing about how beautiful it was. Chloe handed me a small gift, wrapped in simple brown paper, a tiny watercolor painting of the city skyline from my window. I framed it myself, she said shyly. I used my tips. The painting was genuinely good. For the first time, she had given me something that was truly hers, her talent, her time with no strings attached. Over dinner, the conversation was different. It didn't revolve around Chloe's problems. They asked me about my job, about Alex, about my new project with genuine curiosity. Chloe talked about her work without complaining, even telling a funny story about a difficult customer. My father admitted that downsizing was an adjustment, but that he was enjoying having less yard work. For the first time, we were talking like individuals, not as predefined roles in a dysfunctional family drama. As they were leaving, my father turned to me at the door. He looked around my condo, then back at me. This place. You did this all on your own, he said, his voice tinged with something that sounded like admiration. I didn't give you a dime for this. You earned it. I'm proud of you, Clara. Really proud. Those words. The words I had longed to hear my entire life. Spoken without a request attached, when they weren't a prelude to a demand. They meant more than all the false praise of the past combined. I didn't need them anymore, but hearing them still felt like an old wound was finally being allowed to heal. Our relationship isn't perfect. The scars are still there. There will always be a caution, a memory of the betrayal. But something has shifted. Respect has started to take root. They no longer see me as a resource. They are beginning to see me as a person. Justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes, it comes from forcing the people around you to grow up and face reality. By refusing to be their safety net, I had forced them to learn to stand on their own. And in the process, they were starting to find a kind of worth that had nothing to do with money. Watching them leave that night, I realized the final lesson this journey had taught me. One that I carry with me every single day, and that informs every decision I've made since. Watching them leave that night, a comfortable silence settled over my apartment. For the first time, my space wasn't haunted by the echo of an expectation or the weight of a coming obligation. It was just mine. And in that peace, the final lesson this painful journey had taught me crystallized, not as a fleeting thought, but as a foundational truth that has completely reshaped how I see the world and my place in it. The lesson I learned was simple but profound. You cannot base your self-worth on the approval of others, especially when that approval is conditional on what you can give away. For years, I had been operating under a dangerous delusion, one carefully cultivated by my family, that love and respect were things that could be earned. Like an employee striving for a promotion, I thought that if I just worked harder, gave more, sacrificed more, I would finally achieve that coveted position. The unconditionally loved and valued daughter, just like Chloe. I thought there would be a day when they would turn to me and say, "Clara, you've done enough. You can rest now. We see you. We're proud of you." But I was wrong. Utterly and completely wrong. Each act of my sacrifice wasn't a deposit into their account of love. It was a withdrawal from my own account of self-respect. My generosity wasn't a virtue to them. It was an expectation, a duty, a line item they had factored into their budget. They didn't see me, Clara, the person. They saw my utility. They saw a solution to their problems, a safety net for their bad choices, a backup plan for my sister's failed dreams. The more I gave, the more invisible I became. I had become a function, not a family member. It was only when I drew a firm, unshakable boundary in that lawyer's conference room and said enough that they were forced to see me differently. They were forced to confront Clara, the individual, who had limits, needs, and a future that did not include financing theirs. The biggest lesson is that setting boundaries is not a selfish or cruel act. It is a necessary act of self-preservation. It isn't about pushing people away. It's about teaching them where they end and you begin. It's about declaring that you are a sovereign nation, with your own borders, your own laws, and your own resources. not an unclaimed territory that can be colonized and mined at will. It teaches others how to treat you, and more importantly, it reminds you of your own value when you've forgotten it. I also learned the critical and often misunderstood difference between helping and enabling. On the surface, they can look similar, but they are fundamentally opposites. Helping empowers someone. It's handing someone a tool, a piece of advice, a temporary boost so they can build something for themselves. It is rooted in a belief in their potential. Enabling, on the other hand, cripples them. It's continuously rescuing someone from the consequences of their own actions. It stems not from belief, but from control or a misguided need to feel needed. It robs the other person of the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to develop resilience. For years, I thought I was helping Chloe by bailing her out of every financial scrape. I told myself I was giving her the space to be creative. In reality, I was enabling her to remain stunted. I was insulating her from reality. I was preventing her from developing and learning from her own mistakes. I built a gilded cage of dependency around her, and then I resented her for living in it. The hard truth was, my role in her immaturity was not insignificant. By always saying yes, I made it so she never had to learn to hear the word no from the world. By stepping back, by allowing her to fail, by allowing her to face the consequences of not paying her rent, I gave her the greatest gift I possibly could, the chance to fail on her own, and then to succeed on her own. Her growth only began where my enabling ended. But perhaps the most profound lesson was about forgiveness. I used to think forgiveness was something you gave to someone else, a gift of grace that wiped the slate clean. I now understand that true forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself. It does not mean forgetting. It does not mean condoning bad behavior. It most certainly does not mean returning to a toxic situation. For me, forgiveness meant letting go of the bitter resentment that had been eating away at me for years. It meant accepting that my parents and sister are flawed human beings, shaped by their own fears and patterns, and that their actions said far more about them than they ever did about me. Forgiving them did not mean I had to trust them again in the same way. Trust, unlike forgiveness, has to be earned. Our relationship will never go back to the way it was, and that is a good thing. The way it was unhealthy. The way it was nearly broke me. The new relationship we are slowly, hesitantly building is based on a different foundation. Respect. It's more cautious, more distant, but it's also more honest. It's a relationship between adults, not one between a provider and dependents. Forgiveness allows me to participate in this new relationship without carrying the baggage of the past, allowing for the possibility of real change. I had spent years funding the dreams of others without investing in my own. Every dollar I gave them was a dollar taken away from my down payment, from my retirement fund, from my own security. Now, I know that the most important investment any of us can ever make is in our own peace and our own future. No one else is going to do it for you. This journey was excruciating, but it was also necessary. It stripped me of my naivety, but it gave me wisdom. It shattered the idealized family I thought I had, but it gave me the chance to build a more authentic one based on truth. I no longer live my life in search of external approval. I find validation in the work I do, in the relationships I nurture, and most importantly, in the quiet of my own apartment, knowing that I built this sanctuary for myself, by myself. Have you ever had to be the responsible one in your family? Have you felt the pressure to put everyone else's needs before your own? Have you ever felt like the love you received was conditional, tied to what you could provide? Was there a moment, a straw that broke the camel's back, when you realized that things had to change? I truly want to hear your stories and your experiences in the comments below. These stories matter because they remind us that we are not alone in these struggles. And if this story resonated with you, if it touched some part of your own experience, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that their success is their own to celebrate, not for others to consume. Sometimes hearing someone else's story can give us the strength to start rewriting our own. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me the space to share. And remember, the most valuable asset you will ever own is your self-worth, and that's a debt you only owe to yourself. Invest wisely.